Peace and blessings. Greetings, everyone. Free the land. And welcome to this closing plenary of the 45th annual conference of the National Council for Black Studies. I'm Amilcar Shabazz. I am honored and proud to be president of the National Council for Black Studies. And I'm so happy for all of you joining us today, whether here in Zoom land, whether on our live stream through Facebook, or if you watch it later as archived with YouTube or wherever. We greet you. We have a dynamic panel in this plenary to bring messages relative to the theme of this year's conference. And oh, what a year it has. I hope you've gotten the digital program book. There's a lot of us, of our supporters are in there, a lot about the organization, a lot about our discipline. So please make sure you get a copy of the digital book. We made everything free this year, given how tough it is, but we do hope that you take this as an opportunity to renew your membership, or if you're new to us, to take out a membership. Student membership starts at just $35. We go up to professional memberships, memberships for our retired faculty. Everyone, please join us, help support the National Council for Black Studies. With no further ado, I'm going to turn this over to one of our dynamic rising stars who will be moderating the panel today and bring you bring you into this wonderful plenary we have for you. Take care and free the land.
Ashe. Thank you, Dr. Shabazz. And welcome again to our plenary session today. It shares the same title as the theme of this conference: Radically Reimagining and Remaking the World, Black Studies and Black People in Reflection, Reaffirmation, and Resistance. This session in particular brings to light practices of strategic advocacy and scholar activism, which fulfill the social responsibility mission of Africana studies in the face of the pandemic and ongoing state violence. I am Dr. Asante Wasuni Ali, Assistant Professor in the Department of Pan-African Studies at Kent State University, and it is my honor and pleasure to introduce our wonderful panelists for this afternoon's plenary. I will start with introducing Dr. Sarita Davis, an Associate Professor in the Department of Africana Studies and affiliate faculty in the School of Public Health at Georgia State University. She has served on the board of AID Atlanta and the American Evaluation Association. She is a native of Los Angeles, California, and currently lives in Atlanta, Georgia. She has published on the topics of HIV prevention, education, and culturally responsive evaluation in the fields of Africana studies, anthropology, education, evaluation, mental health, public health, and social work. She is a co-editor on a forthcoming book entitled Black Women in Public Health: Strategies to Name, Locate, and Change Systems. Dr. Sarita's presentation that she will deliver to us today is entitled Africana Scholar-Activism in Response to COVID-19, Building Solidarity and Networking the Academy and the Community. I also will introduce panelists Dr. Molina Abdullah, professor and former chair of Pan-African Studies at California State University, Los Angeles. Dr. Abdullah is the co-founder of Black Lives Matter Los Angeles and co-director of Black Lives Matter Grassroots. She is a mama of 3 children, a recognized expert on race, gender, class, and social movements. Abdullah is the author of numerous scholarly articles and book chapters with subjects ranging from political coalition building to womanist mothering. Professor Abdullah is a womanist scholar activist, understanding the role that she plays in the academy as intrinsically linked to broader struggles for the liberation of oppressed people. Professor Abdullah is the leader in the fight for ethnic studies in the K-12 and university systems, and was part of the historic victories that made ethnic studies a requirement in the Los Angeles Unified School District in 2014 and the California State University system in 2020. Melina is creator, host, and producer of the radio program Move the Crowd, and co-host and co-producer of Beautiful Struggle, both on 90.7 FM, part of the Pacifica Radio Network. Dr. Abdullah serves on a number of community boards and is the recipient of many awards that recognize and honor her activism, scholarship, and service to communities. She was recognized by LA Weekly as one of the 10 most influential Los Angeles leaders, Urban Girl of the Year by 2 Urban Girls, and one of the 15 fiercest sisters of 2015 by Fierce. She has appeared on MSNBC, CNN, Fox Soul, TV1, ABC, Revolt TV, BET, and the list goes on. She's also featured in films, Invisible Portraits, Hello Privilege, It's Me, Chelsea, 13th, When Justice Isn't Just, Injustice or Else, and also television series Good Trouble and Two Sides. Dr. Abdullah's presentation is entitled Activism and Advocacy of Black Lives, from the Campus to the Community. And finally, I introduce Dr. Milana Karenga, Professor and Chair of the Department of Africana Studies, University of California, Long Beach. An activist, scholar of national and international recognition, Dr. Karenga has played a major role in Black intellectual and political culture since the 1960s, especially in Black studies and in social movements, such as the Black Power movement, the Black Arts movement, and the Million Man March, for which he wrote the mission statement. He is also executive director of the African American Cultural Center and chair of US and the National Association of Kawaida Organizations. He is the creator of Pan-African Cultural Holiday, Kwanzaa, and the Nguzo Saba, and author of numerous scholarly articles and books, including Introduction to Black Studies, Kwanzaa, A Celebration of Family, Community, and Culture, Odu Ifa, The Ethical Teachings, Ma'at, The Moral Ideal, in Ancient Egypt, A Study in Classical African Ethics, and Kawaida in Questions of Life and Struggle. Dr. Karenga is the recipient of numerous awards for scholarship, leadership, and service, including the Paul Robeson Zoro Neale Hurston Award, the CLR James Award, and the President's Award, all from the National Council for Black Studies. Currently, he is writing a book on the social and ethical philosophy of Malcolm X, titled The Liberation Ethics of Malcolm X, Critical Consciousness, Moral Grounding, and Transformative Struggle. The presentation that Dr. Karenga will deliver to us today is entitled Scholarship, Advocacy, and Activism, Social Policy, Social Struggle, and the Weber Bill, AB 1460. As you can see, we have a powerhouse panelists here today, and without any further delay, we will go ahead and get this conversation started with Dr. Sarita Davis. And you're on mute, Dr. Davis.
Okay, can you hear me now? Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Suni Ali. I'm honored to be on this panel with Dr. Abdullah and Dr. Karenga, and with you as a former student, graduate of our department. It is a full circle moment. So I'm happy to be a part of this. I also wanted to thank Dr. Umoja for putting this together and including me in this. I'm very honored to be among all of you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And we will get started. So, wait. Okay, I don't know where my cursor went, but okay. I think I can still advance it. So I will be presenting on, trying to minimize this side. Africana activism in response to COVID-19. Okay. So the making of the Africana Studies COVID series is what I will be presenting on. And I will be presenting in 5 parts. And I have a timeline here to kind of go through the process. The quarantine, the Cornell crew, the COVID series, the dual pandemic, and lessons learned. So, of course, we're all familiar with COVID-19 and the quarantine. And we all know COVID is a highly contagious and deadly virus, which was developed through animal to human transmission. And the novel coronavirus, also known as COVID-19, caused worldwide sheltering in place orders last year. As of March 20th, there was an official shutdown of the United States. When that happened, probably about a week before, this is the backdrop to this, a dear friend of mine who I went to graduate school with, Andrea Anderson, wanted to have a reunion of all of the Black graduate students who were at Cornell at that time, which was between 1991 and 1997. And we had our initial Zoom call March 13th. That Zoom call has become a weekly Saturday call, and it allows us space to discuss issues of COVID-19 that impacts our lives. We are continuing that call. We have had that call every week since March 13th of last year. So at 6:30 this evening, I'll be joining that call again. What quickly became apparent to me, we were all at Cornell about 26 years ago, and in various disciplines, economics, public health, evaluation, engineering, law, epidemiology. 26 years later, when we reconvened to have this reunion call in the midst of COVID, it's quite apparent that all of these people have evolved into problem-solving professionals. And what was initially just a call to become reacquainted became a little think tank. And we immediately realized that among us, we had a lot of people who had important information, vital information to help us interpret the events that were happening at that moment with regard to COVID. So I'll give you, for example, one person, Iyabo Obasanjo, who is an epidemiologist. When we would have conversations about what the virus was, potentials for the vaccine, she had the information to educate us. And it became something that I realized a lot of people who look like us didn't have that information. There were people in the community talking about the impact of COVID-19 on the Black and brown communities, the disparate and disproportionate impact, but those people didn't look like us, and they weren't framing the issues in ways that were really relevant to the Black community. And we knew that there was a place for that. So with that information in mind, I approached Dr. Akinyele Umoja, and I said, this would be a great opportunity for the Department of African American Studies to host a series of conversations with other scholars and other people in the community to talk about these issues in a way that centered the Black lived experience and not something that made us tangential as just a growing tally of people who were dying from the virus. There were ways in which we could use and leverage our connections, networks, and brain power to create platforms of information that could inform our communities. And with his blessing and support, we approached Auburn Avenue Research Library here in Atlanta, and they agreed to co-sponsor the event. And it ultimately became a 7-part series that was hosted on Zoom and Facebook Live, starting May 1st through August 14th of 2020. In total, there were over 20 participants that participated on that series of calls that lasted over the summer, with over 7,500 people watching the initial broadcast. What I'm sharing with you here, so you get a sense of what the topics were. As I said before, there were 7 topics, and we networked with people in the department. A lot of our faculty hosted these calls or participated on them, but there were also people outside. So here we have the first web series, which dealt with resistance, voting. And we had Dr. Morris, who's in our department, Attorney Davis, and Cliff Albright, who was also a graduate of Cornell, and Dr. Lakita Bennett Bailey, who is in our department as well. The second series was May 15th, and that one we talked about public health and trying to get a better understanding of how public health actually affected our ability to access services around COVID, understand the ways in which we were as a community, how we are affected. We talked about the potential of a vaccination and what to look for, what to be concerned about. So basically that session contextualized the historical and systemic factors that place the Black community at increased risk of exposure. I hosted that particular one, and we had panelists from Ronald Braithwaite, who was at Morehouse School of Medicine, Rodney Lynn, who is interim dean of the School of Public Health at Georgia State, Dr. Angela Odoms, who is at the University of Illinois in Chicago, also a Cornell grad, and Iyabo Obasanjo, who is at William and Mary College, also a Cornell grad. And it was important for us to have graduate students present as well. So Brittany Perdier, who was one of our master's students, participated. The third panel was about education, the future of schooling in the Black community, African Americans' education and COVID. In that session, we explored how the pandemic immediately impacts higher ed and analyze how it might permanently change the character of learning in America. Our current chair, Dr. Jonathan Gales, hosted. Dr. Jenny Jones, who is the dean of the School of Social Work at Clark Atlanta. Aminata Umoja, who is the founder of Quilombo Academic and Cultural Institute. Kristen Long, who is a graduate of our master's program. And Jana Johnson Davis, who is a Decatur City School Board member, participated in that one. The next series was focused on the Black economy. We were looking at employment, alternative economies. How would COVID affect the macro and micro economy in the African American community? And this session, I leveraged pretty much all of my contacts and friends at Cornell. So everyone here listed here was a graduate. Andrea Anderson, who's at the Skillman Foundation, Kerwin Charles, who is the dean of the Yale School of Management, Calvin Holmes, who is president of the Chicago Community Loan Fund, and Eldred Harris, who's the founder of eLab. The next series was Incarceration. When hand sanitizer is contraband, how do you contain the virus? And so we looked at the threat of the virus as it is especially acute in prisons where adequate supplies are unavailable and social distancing is impossible. And the session examined how incarceration increased risk to exposure to the coronavirus. Our own Dr. Maurice Hobson hosted that session, and we had Associate Professor Christina Rivers, who's at DePaul, Tawana Morgan, who is here in Atlanta, and Jihad Uhuru, who is a graduate of our program, also someone who had experienced incarceration. Another series we hosted was dealing specifically with the media and how communicating about COVID-19 really can't be addressed fully in our community without looking at the history of mistrust. So the panel explored how historical mistrust of the media affects African Americans and their increased risk to exposure. This panel was hosted by Dr. Lisa Shannon, who is a lecturer in our program. And we had reporters from the press, from the print media, Rohan Preston, Sydney Tucker, who was with Al Jazeera at the time, and two of our master's students, Gail McFarland and Zaina Sanders. Now, there was one last panel on wellness and health. I couldn't find that flyer, but that panel was hosted by our own Dr. Makungu Akanyela, and also participating on that panel were Reverends Melva Sampson Young, Stephanie Crumpton, and oops, I'm blanking on the name. There was another person. I don't have that name in front of me. Sorry, I apologize. So with all of those presentations, something happened dramatically in the community that shifted our conversations. And we had our first panel on May 1st. On May 25th was when the dual pandemic hit. And that dual pandemic came in the form of the death of George Floyd. Prior to that, there had been plenty of other deaths due to police brutality in our community. Protesters took to the streets across the United States and the globe to make their discontent known about the unwarranted police brutality, which took the lives of unarmed Black citizens like Tony McDade, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and countless other Black people who had been killed at the hands of law enforcement officers. So the entire summer of 2020 saw global and national protests, peaceful protests. There was concern that the protests, however, might spike and contribute to the growing rates of COVID-19 in the community. Many health experts were debating the risk of transmission against the need for public protests in light of irrefutable social injustices. If we are totally honest with ourselves, we must acknowledge that people are willing to risk their lives to protest their fears about systemic racism in public health and police brutality. In the end, people have issued a decree stating that they are no longer willing to endure disproportionate mortality and morbidity from police brutality or flawed public health practices that devalue Black lives. On June 5th, on a podcast, a CNN podcast with Dr. Sanjay Gupta, he interviewed Dr. Camara Phyllis Jones, who is an epidemiologist, and she's the former president of the American Public Health Association. And in that interview, it was entitled "Two Viruses, the Dual Pandemic." So there was very much this heightened sense of fear in the community about people protesting and perhaps contracting the virus, spreading the virus. But one of the things Dr. Jones said in her conversation with Dr. Gupta was, Blacks in the United States are at disproportionate risk of sickness and death from both COVID-19 and systemic racism in policing. We have to protest because we are not okay. At the heart of both of these public health crises is the longstanding disregard for Black life. Because of that dual pandemic of police brutality in our community, as well as our disproportionate deaths of Black and brown people due to the COVID virus, there became some very real and stark communications about racism in the public health system. As a matter of fact, the sitting president of the American Association for Public Health came out and made a formal statement that racism is a public health issue. And to understand this, you have to understand the origins of public health. In the late 1700s, public health emerged as a field of practice and study out of concern for how communities treated and managed contagions threatening the population. The primary goal of public health was to reduce exposure to disease and death among the broad community. The history of public health tells a story about the search for ways of securing health and preventing disease in the population. Epidemic and endemic infectious disease stimulated thought and innovation and how to prevent disease on a practical level. Oftentimes, before the cause was scientifically identified. The prevention of disease in populations revolves around defining diseases, measuring their occurrence, and seeking effective interventions. I'll not go into all of the details around that. It's important, though, that you have understanding of the origins of public health to understand that racism is built into the very foundation of public health. Public health, according to scholars, marginalized communities were rarely included in the broad public health agenda, including indigenous communities, enslaved Africans, women, prisoners, disabled, LGBTQ, and youth. If you're familiar with the book, Medical Apartheid, written by Margaret Washington in 2008, she goes into great detail about the ways in which racism shows up throughout public health. It's well documented. I will give you this one example. Margaret Washington talks about it in her book. In the 1930s and 40s, African-American public health advocates following in the footsteps of Booker T. Washington promoted such initiatives as Negro Health Week to provide tuberculosis prevention and care to Blacks who rarely gained entry to quality medical care. But white support of such initiatives was predicated on concerns that the Black domestics who cared for their children, cleaned their homes, drove their cars, and prepared their meals might import tuberculosis into their white households. If any of you are familiar with some of the early reports around COVID-19 and some wealthy people were making decisions to shelter in place with their health staff so as not to expose their homes to the coronavirus. So it sounds very familiar. Also, in 1984, Margaret Heckler, who was then the Secretary of Health and Human Services, she was very dissatisfied with the way health disparities were being reported to Congress. So she provided the very first comprehensive review of health disparities endured by Black and minority groups compared with whites. And that report became known as the Secretary's Task Force on Black and Minority Health, which also helped to create the Office of Minority Health in 1986. What she identified were system-wide inequities and disparities that needed to be addressed. And here we are 36 years later, and we're seeing that those things have not been done. They're very much apparent in how the COVID-19 has disproportionately affected Black and brown people to this day. People not having access to testing in our communities, people not having access to vaccinations, the people who most needed, these first responders, these essential workers who are the ones who are making sure we're getting fed, we're getting our groceries, stores are open, but yet and still they are lagging far behind in getting vaccines nationwide. So the disparities continue. I put this composite here as a reminder as I was thinking about the very heightened concern people that had about protesters on the streets. And it made me think of this quote by Fannie Lou Hamer, in which she says, "What was the point of being scared? The only thing they could do was kill me." And it kind of seemed like they'd been trying to do that a little bit at a time since I could remember. And so it puts into context the fact that Black and brown people had truly become sick and tired of being sick and tired. And they put the protests and humanity of the community and the needs of the community, not frivolously, because most of the protests were mass. And there has been subsequent research which has shown that these mass peaceful protests did not become these spreader events. But I think this encapsulates the feeling and passion and angst that the Black and brown communities were feeling. So in reflecting on that 7-part series and some of the things that we learned from that experience, and we're still unpacking this, but one thing that was consistent throughout all of the series was that people severely mistrust government entities. It is pervasive. They don't trust the press. They don't trust public health. They don't trust the media. And the desire to see people who look like them presenting the information to them was much more desirable than what was being offered. Another theme was that across the conversations, technology didn't work well for everyone. It was being used as a way to connect people, but what quickly became apparent were low income and marginalized people oftentimes didn't have access to the internet. So when people move to, for example, telehealth, you can't come to the doctor, get on your computer. Well, a lot of people don't have access to that. And so it made them further marginalized. And we're seeing that still today when it comes to signing up for COVID testing and for vaccination, because you have to be on the computer to get access. But if you're an essential worker, you're out all day, you miss an opportunity to sign up, which means you have to wait till the next day, which might not be available to you because most of these slots are booked 24 hours in advance. Third, the public health system is fundamentally flawed when it comes to its approach to Black communities. It's very much centered, and I get that public health is public health, but when we reflect on the origins and when public health started, Black and brown people weren't integrated into society. And the places where we live and exist are still marginalized. So public health operates as we go to it rather than it coming to us, which is problematic for our communities. What might be more effective is population-centered approaches to public health. And what I mean by that, if we situate the issue of COVID-19 in our communities, then we start with the lived experiences of our community. That was one of Terry Kershaw's favorite sayings. If we started knowing the context in which the community lives, then we automatically begin with where they have access or where they don't have access, rather than expecting people to come to the county public health facility to get assistance. So with that said, that's the gist of my presentation. And I look forward to questions and answers later. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. And now we will hear from Dr. Molina Abdullah.
Greetings, everybody, and thank you for that, Dr. Davis. That was really enlightening and meshes well also with a lot of the work that we've been doing in Black Lives Matter. I think everyone at the beginning of this pandemic didn't really know if the world was coming to an end or not, and wanted to get information as quickly as we could to our communities. And so I didn't realize you were doing this series, but Black Lives Matter has also been doing a series since that moment. We started something called This Is Not a Drill, trying to get information out to folks. And then it's kind of sustained itself, not so much around just COVID, but around kind of Black political engagement. And so we do that every Thursday night at 7 o'clock. So I'm going to try to figure out how to plug in with you so that we can share efforts. So again, thank you very much for your work. I think it speaks volumes to who we are as Black Studies, that, you know, Black Studies is really the discipline that recognizes, one, that we come out of Black freedom struggle, but two, all of our work needs to not just be confined to classrooms, but be a tool that's useful in the freedom and liberation of our people. And so your work absolutely reflects that. And so I'm grateful to be in community with you. So I'm talking about Black Lives Matter. I'm talking about this moment, and really what I'd like to focus on is making Black Lives Matter on campus. And I'm going to share a few slides. I didn't do as much work on slide development and making sure I had visuals for you all as Dr. Davis did, but I'm hoping that I convey what it is I'm trying to share well nonetheless. And I pray that the words and energy are right with our ancestors, and that they inhabit my words and so and my presence here. And so I wanted to talk about how we make Black Lives Matter on campus and how we are true to our discipline that, of course, again, is Black liberation. At Pan-African Studies at Cal State LA, our motto is that we are the intellectual arm of the revolution. And so the work that we have to do has to be around transforming the world and making it fit for our children and grandchildren and generations to come. And so this moment that we're in, and we recognize that we are in a movement moment.
What? What about it?
I think somebody's
Hey,
mute.
welcome to come back here. Shit.
Okay, am I okay to continue?
Yes, you're fine. Thank you.
Okay. So, you know, we're in a moment, I've described this moment as a moment when the world has cracked wide open. And actually, I should probably start sharing these slides so I don't talk through them and not have them here. To start at 1. Now you're seeing everything. So making Black Lives Matter on campus. So we are in a Black Lives Matter movement moment. This is no surprise to everybody. We know that we're in this Black Lives Matter movement moment. And Black Lives Matter, we recognize that we descend from a long line of Black freedom struggle, a long history of Black freedom struggle that remains unbroken. And so we are simply stepping into what I believe and what I call our sacred duty, that we can't simply accept the world as it's been handed to us. We can't simply swallow white supremacist, patriarchal, heteronormative capitalism and accept it and do what Dr. Karenga calls try to find a comfortable place in oppression. We have to upend that system. And so in Black Lives Matter, we absolutely view ourselves and take on the positioning of abolitionism. And abolitionism, as we know in Black studies, really has two forms. And many folks talk about abolitionism only as the first part of abolition, which is upending unjust systems. And so in Black Lives Matter, we believe in upending unjust systems. We understand that policing in this country is not reformable. It descends from slave catching, and as ridiculous as it would be to say, well, hey, let's just tinker around the edges of chattel slavery. Let's make it kinder and gentler. That would be a ridiculous statement because chattel slavery had to be abolished, had to be upended. Well, every vestige of it does too. And so policing has to be abolished. It has to be upended, right? Jails and prisons are also vestiges of chattel slavery, and they have to be abolished and upended. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we see that happening. But the second part of abolition is not just upending unjust systems, but bringing in, ushering in, visioning, and building new systems. And so when we say we want to end policing, we want to abolish the police, and I'll talk more about defund the police, what President Obama called a snappy slogan and what we call a policy demand, right? Defunding the police is really the first step towards abolishing the police. When we say we want to abolish the police, that doesn't mean that we want to abolish public safety. We always say it in combination with reimagining public safety, because we know for Black people in particular, our safety has never come through policing. In fact, the presence of police make us less safe. There is no, and this is my scholarly opinion, that there is no Black person on the face of the earth who has felt more safe because a police cruiser pulls up behind them in traffic, right? That causes our heart rates to go up, that causes panic, that causes fear sometimes, but it doesn't bring safety, right? And so when we say abolish the police, what we know does bring us safety is building strong communities and having communities that are well resourced. And so we are abolitionists in the sense that we want to abolish unjust systems, but we also want to build new systems that actually bring safety, that actually bring a world that is fit again for our children and the generations to come. So what does that mean for us on our campuses? What we've seen with the world cracking wide open is a willingness of campuses, I should have done this first, of campuses to issue statements. So all over the country, especially, last summer and moving into fall, campuses were issuing Black Lives Matter statements. They were putting things on their websites, putting things, my campus wouldn't even put it on their website. They put it on the library website, but they were making these statements. And when we think about those statements really weren't reflected on our campuses. And in the words of James Baldwin, many of us kind of pursed our lips and rolled our eyes and said to ourselves, I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. We know that our campuses were not places where Black lives mattered. And so we challenged, many of us are challenging our campuses to actually not just say Black lives matter, but make Black Lives Matter. And I'm gonna go back to just talk a little bit about what we mean when we say make Black Lives Matter and what is Black Lives Matter. So just a quick history. Black Lives Matter was founded in 2013, specifically July 13th, 2013, which was the day that George Zimmerman was acquitted in the murder of Trayvon Martin. And all across the country, cities erupted not because Trayvon was the first Black boy to be murdered by white supremacy, but because we kind of thought that maybe he'd get some semblance of justice, because George Zimmerman wasn't really a cop and he wasn't really even white. His mama's Peruvian, right? And so maybe we thought that because George Zimmerman didn't really or shouldn't have had all of the privileges of whiteness, and because he wasn't really fully shielded by the state as a member of law enforcement, and because Trayvon Martin was a 17-year-old child doing exactly what he should have been doing at the moment that he was killed, we thought that maybe, just maybe this time we would get some semblance of justice. And I want to say some semblance because we know that there is no justice for murdered children, and there is no justice for murdered children's families, not in a real sense, because justice would mean that they continue to live. But some semblance of justice means that their killers are held to account, right? Well, when George Zimmerman was acquitted and he was given his gun back, cities all across the country erupted. And in Los Angeles, thousands of people poured into the streets and engaged in what Brenda Stevenson from UCLA calls intuitive organizing, right? Which is really the organizing that's organic, that comes from folks, that's not planned, but moves based on spirit and emotion. And we engaged in intuitive organizing for a period of about 3 days. And then on July 15th, so I was one of the ones who was out in the streets. And we know that in Black studies, we're also deeply connected to our students. And so once I was out in the streets, I was out with a couple of other faculty members. I also invited my students out. And so students from Pan-African Studies at Cal State LA really were very present in those initial protests. And what you see in the picture on the right is one of my students, Charlia Gully, who's now a graduate student at University of Miami. And this was our first planned protest of Black Lives Matter. Initially, we had said that we were struggling for justice in the name of Trayvon Martin, but on July 15th, 2013, when we were pulled together by Black Lives Matter co-founder Patrisse Cullors, and you see on the left the picture of our three co-founders, Patrisse Cullors, Opal Tometi, and Alicia Garza. When we were pulled together on July 15th, 2013, we gathered in the Black artist community called St. Elmo Village. And under the moonlight, we pledged to build a movement, not a moment, a movement, not a moment. Because as was previously shared, of course, Trayvon Martin was not the first Black child whose life was stolen by police violence or white supremacy. So we'd been organizing for Oscar Grant and Sean Bell and Amadou Diallo and Devin Brown, and the list goes on and on. But what we committed to on July 15th, 2013 is to absolutely organize in their names, but also to really, again, engage in abolitionism to upend unjust systems. And so what we did is eventually adopt the words that were typed on July 13th by Alicia Garza. Black Lives Matter became our rallying cry. And what you see on that poster that Charlie is carrying is the big hashtag, which was Justice for Trayvon Martin, Los Angeles. That's what those letters stood for. But right above it in very small letters, you'll see the hashtag Black Lives Matter. And so we are now, oops, did I not have this here? Okay, so let me share what Black Lives Matter is. And so in 2013, we wanted to be intentional about what it is that we are building, about what it means to build a movement, not a moment. And we crafted this statement that Black Lives Matter is working for a world where Black lives are no longer systematically and intentionally targeted for demise. So we agree with Manning Marable's brilliant statement and how capitalism underdeveloped Black America when he talks about these systems being intentionally and deliberately designed to produce these outcomes. So we're working for a world where we're no longer systematically and intentionally targeted for demise. We affirm our contributions to the society, our humanity, and our resilience in the face of deadly oppression. We've put our sweat equity and love for Black people into creating a political project, taking the hashtag off of social media and into the streets. The call for Black lives to matter is a rallying cry for all Black lives striving for liberation. So we want to make sure that we're clear that Black Lives Matter is not a plea. We are not asking white supremacy to see us. We're affirming for ourselves that we have the power to transform the world in which we live. And so when we think about this movement moment, when we think about what's happened with the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, with the murder of Breonna Taylor, with the murder of George Floyd, I believe and we believe in Black Lives Matter, which is absolutely a racial and social justice movement. But even more than that, we are a spiritual movement that's driven by spirit, and which we pray spirit continues to embody. And really, if we think of Black liberation struggle and Black freedom struggle from the beginning, right? It's always been driven by and been victorious because of the presence of spirit. And so when they stole the lives, when white supremacy stole the lives of Breonna, of Ahmaud, of George Floyd, you know, their spiritual energy really kind of coupled with this pandemic moment when we could not look away. And the world cracked wide open. And millions of people, now white folks will tell you, you know, it was not, but it was millions of people around the world found themselves pulled into these streets. And what you see on the right is just one of our protests. That's our June 7th protest in Los Angeles. And there were hundreds of thousands of people. Now, initially, media tried to tell us that there were 5,000 people in the streets, but we have eyes and we can see that people couldn't even fit into the streets on Hollywood Boulevard. In fact, this aerial shot, which somebody used a drone to get, also includes, if you look to the streets, 2 blocks in each direction, north and south, there were streets that were similar to this, right? And so we were pulled into the streets and felt compelled to demand justice. That contrasts significantly with these statements that were issued by our universities. Our universities felt like they had to say Black Lives Matter, but they didn't do the work to make Black Lives Matter, right? So Black Lives Matter absolutely means defund the police. We know defunding the police, again, it's a policy demand, not a snappy slogan. It is a demand that we think about what it means that virtually every major city in this country spends upwards of 50% of its general fund on police. In Los Angeles, in the midst of a public health pandemic with an unprecedented economic fallout, LAPD was awarded 54% of the city's general fund. And the rate of crime at the time was virtually 0. So we're saying defund the police so that we can fund mental health resources, so that we can fund health resources, so that we can fund housing. Again, in Los Angeles, before the pandemic, 60,000 people were unhoused in this county. And, you know, since the pandemic, the most recent number is that we can project more than 200,000 people being unhoused because of the economic fallout of COVID-19. We're estimating now that about 70% of that number are Black people. So when we say defund the police, we want to remember the teachings of Dr. Julianne Malveaux that, you know, budgets are zero-sum games and they are moral and ethical documents. So if you're spending 54% of your general fund on police, you are not spending on the things that actually make communities safe. And again, we couple that with reimagining public safety, with embracing the things that we know to make communities safe, with embracing spending on the things that we just talked about. We're also very clear about who our enemies are. It's not just white supremacist patriarchal capitalism in the heteronormative capitalism in the theoretical sense, but we also need to recognize what they embody. And so, or who embodies that. And so police associations that describe themselves as unions, but are not unions. Those of us who teach in the CSU know that we are actual union members. We're members of the California Faculty Association. We're unions because unions don't just work for the very narrow interests of their members, but they have to demonstrate solidarity. And so we're doing work to end police associations. We also know that this Black Lives Matter movement moment has compelled our young people to also step into their sacred duty. And so we are so proud and encouraged and inspired by our children who've been in many ways much more successful than their adult counterparts and utilizing this moment. I think it's because of their audacity and impatience in many ways, right? And so in Los Angeles, they've been successful in defunding school police by 35%. And so they've kicked police off campus. Police are no longer allowed in their schools. They've ended the use of pepper spray against our children. And a year before that, in the summer of 2019, they've stopped random searches of children in schools. They've also made a part of their demands ethnic studies, authentic ethnic studies in the K-12 system. So I want us to be challenged as a university system to think about how we use this movement moment. And I'm going to sum up here. We're demanding something called a freedom campus. And what that means for us is using this moment when the world is cracked wide open to do three things. One, to remove police from our campuses and reimagine public safety. That means disarming and divesting from police. That means redirecting those resources to the things that we actually need, like more counselors on campus. And that means ending all contracts between campuses and policing units, even if they're not campus-based police. It also means that we have an opportunity to make our campuses and our classes open to everybody, right? And so one of the things that I did in the fall is I broadcast my class on Facebook. And each week I'd have about 5,000 people tuning into my class. Why not do that? Now, I'm not grading 5,000 papers, but why not talk about Black power? Why not talk about all of the brilliant scholarship that comes out of our discipline with a broader number of people, right? And why not demand of our campuses that admissions be opened up? We also need to declare a state of emergency for Black students. We need to be unapologetically Black in our approach, and we need to remind our campuses that when Black lives matter, everybody else's life also matters. So we're going to start with unapologetic Blackness and allow everybody else to also ride that wave. I recognize I'm running out of time, so let me just hit this third point. Third, we want authentic ethnic studies. And so we've been successful on many of our campuses in making ethnic studies a requirement. But what we've seen is attempts to appropriate what ethnic studies is by institutions that never valued us and always tried to kind of kill what it is we're doing. So we need to claim autonomy over what ethnic studies is, over what Black studies is. So how do we make Black Lives Matter on campus? How do we make Black Lives Matter in Black studies and throughout higher education? There's three things that we bring. We bring our voice, we bring our body, and we bring our resources. So we need our folks to amplify Black Lives Matter. A lot of times Black Lives Matter organizers are sidelined, called things like Black identity extremists, but those of us who have letters behind our names are seen as more legitimate. How do we use that legitimacy to advance the idea that Black people have a right to freedom and that what we're doing is absolutely called for? We also need people to engage in our work. And so if you have students who have some sort of community engagement requirement, please send them our way. And if they don't, then please create these requirements. And then finally, we want us to think about resources. And that means getting your universities to donate to Black Lives Matter. There's been a lot going on, a lot said about Black Lives Matter having raised $90 million over the last year. We absolutely have, and we've given away 60 million of the 90 million to Black-led organizations and to Black people through our Survival Fund program. We also know that comparatively, $90 million for a global movement, what's been measured as the largest global movement in history, largest racial and social justice movement in history, is not that much money. You know how much money Sierra Club raised in the same year? $900 million. And so we want to do the work of institution building. We want to make sure that the work that we do can stand and live as long as we need to struggle for freedom. And so those are the things that I have to share. And I too look forward to engaging in conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdullah. Now we will hear from, last but not least, Dr. Milana Karenga. Please unmute, Dr. Karenga.
I'm sorry, Alice. Unmute myself. Oh, so I assume you can hear me now. I would like to say, sign for this opportunity to meet and exchange ideas that are important to all of us. I'm glad to be on this panel, and I wanted to talk about advocacy and activism, scholarship, advocacy and activism, and how social policy and social struggles are at the heart of what we do as Black Studies scholars. And what I want to do is focus on the Weber Bill, AB 1460, because it has such historical importance for us. And it also teaches us a lot about who we are, and where the movement is. The struggle and achievement of the Weber Bill, AB 1460, is a major transformative accomplishment for Black studies, ethnic studies, and the corresponding peoples, African Americans, Native Americans, Latino Americans, and Asian Americans. It is also of major importance for the CSU system and all systems of higher education in the US in terms of the concept and practice of quality education, which by definition is multicultural education. That is to say, a diverse, inclusive, culturally respectful and responsive, and an intellectually responsive education. Indeed, it is neither inclusive, diverse, culturally respectful or responsive, or intellectually responsible to have, for hundreds of years, a monoculture, Eurocentric, self-congratulatory narrative posing as a curriculum and even as quality education. The historical significance and achievement for Black studies and Black people, African people, and other ethnic studies and people is that the initiative first took up and continued the struggle to strengthen its institutional status. And the legislative mandate that Dr. Shelley Weber put forth clearly furthers that aim and represents a permanent beachhead in an ongoing struggle on various fronts, especially to overcome structural disadvantage. I say a beach front in the struggle for various fronts, because that's only one front. And as Malcolm said, wherever Black people are, there's a battle line. That whether you're in the East or the West, the North or the South, you and I are living in a country that is a battle line for all of us. It's important also lies in the organization building, coalition building, and the lessons we learn from it. And it strengthens our California's State University Council on Ethnic Studies, legalizing its role in the collaboration to implement the law. This in turn reaffirmed the principle of disciplinary deference, as I call it. That is, rightfully deferring to experts in the discipline of ethnic studies, as is customary done for all other disciplines. People get confused. They really believe that anybody Black or anybody, actually even white folk, can teach ethnic studies just by picking up a book and learning some content. But they don't do that with physics, right? They don't do that with sociology even, only with Black and other ethnic studies. And so what the law does and what we were able to do through the struggle is to reaffirm the need to respect the discipline experts, the experts in the discipline. Our struggle, as I said, was a continuation of a struggle that was already going long. All of our struggles, if they're righteous, are continuations of that which went before. So the revolt in Ferguson, which was the spark that lit a forest fire of struggles, right, on the community and on campuses, was in fact a continuation of the first revolt we had on the ship when we hit the beach and thereafter. And our struggle in terms of the educational system was a struggle in the 60s, and it continues for relevant education. That was a major concept in our struggle for ethnic studies, for Black studies. And sometimes I'm gonna say Black studies and I'm gonna say ethnic studies, but I'm speaking in the National Council of Black Studies essentially about Black studies. And I want us to understand the vanguard role we played in establishing ethnic studies, and at the same time, pushing this bill forward and winning it for all people concerned. So what we argued for is a relevant education, right? Then and now, right? A liberational education, an emancipatory education that had three basic characteristics. It was meaningful to the students, useful to the community, and reflective of the reality of society and the world. By meaningful to the students, we mean that it was culturally respectful and responsive, containing reflective problematic from their own culture, providing knowledge that is both valuable and valued for learning, life, and liberation. Second, that it was useful to the community, means that it provided knowledge and skill useful in solving problems, meeting challenges, developing its potential, and waging its liberation struggle. It struggled to be itself and to free itself, which comes into our National Council of Black Studies fundamental motto: cultural grounding, right? Academic excellence and social responsibility. Cultural grounding, grounded in the best of our culture, in our intellectual history, in our culture, in our traditions of deep thinking, right? Our epistemologies, right? Our understandings of the world from our own standpoint, right? Being our own definers, not letting the oppressor be our teacher, but doing what every free people does. That is, define their reality in their own image and interest. And third, after being meaningful to the students, useful to the community, it had to be reflective of the realities of society and the world. And one of those realities is that it's a multicultural world. Second, that it is marked by oppression. And third, it is also drawn up and redrawn by resistance, by revolt, revolution, and national liberation struggle. So we needed to know that. So this struggle that led to AB 1460 has a historical context, not only in the 60s, but more recently. the whole idea of a series of interrelated and historical conversations and initiatives in the academy and in the community around critical concerns about the status, the sustainability, development, and future of ethnic studies in the CSU system and the country, right? Because everyone can see pushback and diminishing. And so we began to take up that conversation. These conversations and initiatives especially focuses on policies and practices that aid in the development, sustainment, and advancement of ethnic studies, or that disadvantage and lead to the dissolution of ethnic studies. And so that was the immediate impetus of the formation that launched this struggle, that led to the formation of a task force on the advancement of ethnic studies, led on to Dr. Shirley Weber getting involved in this struggle, being invited in and accepting the invitation in the struggle and supporting it, and finally taking it to its ultimate conclusion as a legislator, putting it and enshrining it in law. And so the immediate impetus for this struggle comes from the Department of Africana Studies at California State University, when the dean came to me and argued that he wanted to downgrade our department to a program. And I had said I would not accept that I did not become chair to preside over the dissolution of the Department of Africana Studies, right? And he had already wrapped Native American studies into anthropology and history. He had sent some of the faculty of Chicano studies to English, and he had taken away the master's program from Asian American studies, which was a small program, and his strongest thing was Asian, not Asian Americans program. So that meant that I would be against the full weight of the system, right? Not just that campus, but the system. And so the whole thing was to organize. And the initiative of organization made it expand to include other ethnic studies units, students, staff, faculty, and their colleagues in the CSU system. And I wanted to just give certainly a reaffirmation of the importance that Dr. Molina Abdullah played in this. The time I called her, she became involved. And when we had a major rally on campus, she was right there and helping. And also I want to give also praise to my own organization, us, and to African American Culture Center and the veterans of struggle that came to campus as alumni, because they had been alumni at Cal State, many of them. And so they came and they led the students and taught them chants and taught them to do the bootlands and taught them how to occupy the buildings, and, you know, just was really involved in with the students and created a synergy that really became successful. And so it involved community leaders, organizing community leaders. It's also the clergy, activists, organizations, institutions on the local and national level, through contact, emails, meetings, calls, petitions, rallies, and social media. Also editorials, we were able to get editorials out, especially in the Los Angeles Central, keep the issue alive in the community. I really want to stress also, and both Melina and I are members of this, but Melina has been on the board of our union, the California Faculty Association, which played a strong role from the beginning and to the end when we had to lobby. We had to lobby legislators and also the governor to do it. CFA played a major role. And again, Dr. Abdullah played a role in that, along with myself and other people. But we supported Shirley in every way that we could. And so I should say Dr. Weber, right? Also, you know, we were able to win for a while the Academic Senate, right? Who, like the CFA, issued statements of support of ethnic studies as essential to the university's realizing its mission of providing a quality education or the effective functioning of students in a multicultural society and world. Also, we were able to strengthen the council, the CSU Council on Ethnic Studies, which is our organization. I'm on the steering committee of that, and so is Dr. Abdullah Melina. And so we were very active in pushing this fight, right? This was the intellectual arm of the struggle on the ground, right? And so we also got involved in the struggle. We just wasn't making decisions. We were also involved in every level of the struggle. And so finally we demanded a meeting with the chancellor, and Dr. Weber and the Black Caucus Associate, also one who is county supervisor, Holly Mitchell, who was head of the Black Caucus, Black Legislative Caucus, also support us. Roddy Wright, who knew budget, because we had to leverage budget issues to get the chancellor in the room, right? So it's just a whole thing. We can't talk about it in question you ask, we can do it, but I just want to show you like the complexity of organizing to get this done. It's not like you just put it on the agenda. There's a lot to be done there. And so finally, of course, the Legislative Black Caucus and colleagues became involved, as I said, in the conversation and initiative, and passed a resolution reaffirming the vital importance of ethnic studies in the educational mission of the state and the need to maintain these departments and programs as an essential part of what it calls higher education. And so the Legislative Caucus, led by Shirley, Dr. Weber, met with the chancellor and asked him to look into what was happening here. So what he did in response was to call us together and form something called the, he wanted to form a task force on ethnic studies. But we pushed back, and I said that, no, we're not here to talk about ethnic studies and what is wrong with it and all that. We want to talk about what you did, what the university did or did not do to sustain a critical aspect of the educational process. So we're not here to be studied, right? We're here to ask, how do we advance ethnic studies? So we changed the name of the task force from Task Force on Ethnic Studies to a task force, the chancellors or CSU task force on the advancement of ethnic studies. Task force, CSU task force on the advancement of ethnic studies. And so we took that task to review and make recommendations concerning critical issues, policies, and practice which impact the status, perceived and real value, and functioning, sustainment, and advancement of ethnic studies in the context of their role in the mission of the university. And I'm speaking a lot from my paper is built on the task force report. I was the principal writer for that. So many of the ideas in it come from the pedagogy that I've been teaching and developing, as well as conversation, of course, with my colleagues who added to and put their parts in it. And so this is a beautiful thing because it represents a confluence of forces. The ongoing struggles against police violence and systemic racism, the conversations about Black studies and the state of it, and concerned about people collapsing it into things that it's not, or even erasing it. Also, the Ferguson Struggle in 2014 and its impact on the intensification of struggles on campus and in the community, because it was, as I said earlier, the spark that ignited a forest fire of struggles. And then, of course, from that, the rising and expansion of Black Lives Matter movement, again, a key role in the climate that is created in this struggle, and the role, of course, that Dr. Abdullah plays in the struggle. She's on the task force with us. I recommend it. Everyone welcomed her. That's a treasure for all of us, so that's a very important thing. And also the role that the organization, the African American Culture Center, played in this, the continuing struggle of other Black movements around the country, reparations movement, the anti-poverty movement, the Coweta movement, the abolitionist movement, the environmental movement, the renewed student activism movement. All of this confluence of forces laid the basis to enhance our capacity to win. But the key person, and I can never overstress this, is Dr. Shirley Weber, who is past president of the NCBS in 2002 and to 2006. She is now Secretary of State, right? First African-American ever a Secretary of State in California. She's a former assemblywoman in the District 79 of San Diego and surrounding communities. And that's how, when she advanced the bill, she was a member of the San Diego Board of Education. She's a member of the Assembly's Committee on Higher Education, chair of the Assembly's Budget Committee, and chair of the Legislative Black Caucus. And finally, of course, she was professor and chair of Africana Studies for over 30 years, right, in San Diego at SDSU, right? So as we began to move, and she first called us to testify at a hearing and put together an Assembly Concurrent Resolution 17 in July 2013. And it endorsed the invaluable work of California's Africana Studies departments, programs, and related projects, and their faculty, staff, and students. It also recognized the leadership of the beneficiaries of those programs as contributing to the academic rigor, prominence, and distinguished quality of California colleges and universities, and the vitality of other public and private institutions, including California state government. And finally, it supported the continuation of Africana Studies departments and programs and related projects in California's institution of higher education. And so we had, as all this was going on, we had this task force, and we made these 10 recommendations. And the first one was that ethnic studies become a GE requirement in the CSU system, and Shirley enshrines that in the law, AB 1460. She takes this document that we're talking from, and she actually used a lot of the language and formulated her arguments for this bill. Second thing we said, increase and maintain regular and consistent hiring. How can you have a department if you don't hire? Support curricular development that strengthens ethnic studies departments and programs and increases enrollment and open access. To revise and strengthen advising practices that leave us out, actually to revise them, because they're always teaching white studies, right? They don't like for us to say that, but I always say that in the meeting. I mean, this is white study. It's so normal, you don't even have to name it. We say black study, we just come right out and say it. But y'all have made things so normally white that you don't even put white in front of them. But actually, you know, the content reveals what it's all about, right? And of course, 5, fostering and creating a climate to reaffirm ethnic studies' central role in the university. Not a marginal practice, but central to what it means to have a quality education. Also, 6, strengthen and expand community engagement initiative. That's how Black studies come into being, you know, arguing for and fighting for and struggling for our community. 7, expand and incentivize and provide resources for best practices of ethnic study. Build on the best practices we develop. Conduct system. 8, conduct system-wide diversity and equity assessment, right? 9, establish formal relationship with the statewide ethnic studies council, our council, right? And then maintain the moratorium, because we asked for a moratorium, not just for Black studies, even though we started out just as Black studies. Because first there was not the support that we needed, right? Because, well, you know, people are afraid of things, right? They're afraid of deans, afraid of police, not the police, the president, maybe, I'm sorry, the president, the provost, the deans, right? But, you know, that's not me, you know, I'm not admitting that, right? So I'm confronting, right? This is it, education, mobilization, organization, and confrontation. That leads to transformation, right? And so one of the most important things that comes out of this is we define ethnic studies. Ethnic studies is the interdisciplinary and comparative study of race and ethnicity with special focus on 4 historically defined racialized core groups: Native Americans, African Americans, Latino Americans, and Latino Americans, and Asian Americans. Now, why is that important? Because white ethnics, especially Jewish people, began to say we should be included. Now, we had Jewish allies that say, hey, you know, look, what they're saying to you is right. When we first started, Jewish studies didn't even want to be counted with us, right? They were trying to get into the Gentile Association, and they were rejected for a while. Finally, they got into it, but they never thought. They thought we were somehow politicizing education, as if it wasn't politicized already by white people and white supremacy and racism that established their narrative as the only narrative worthy of being taught, right? And then discredited everybody else. And then, of course, I'm not preaching. I saw a text say, I'm teaching. I'm from the Malcolm School. I'm not from King's School. King's preach. I'm teaching. I just, Black people just talk strong. I'm a strong speaker, so that's it. But I know what you mean, so thanks. And so we define ethnic studies in three ways: as a single discipline, right? Some people just have it. Second, a combined administrative unit, which happens a lot of times against people's will. And third, just a conceptual category designating a combined ethnic studies focus. And one of the things I want us to stress here, and I want us to see this, that as Dr. Weber said, when people started trying to get in, right? Try to get in and talk about they need to be in, all the other groups. Well, whenever as I told the dean and the provost and the president, whenever y'all create these overarching categories, we get lost in it, right? Even though we started, you actually take it over. And like diversity has been used to include white people, right? Different kinds of white people. We had a class, a woman, a professor colleague proposed and got accepted a class that talked about two kinds of Italians, right? What in the world is that, right? So if diversity is going to mean anything, people got to know it has to do with race and ethnicity first and foremost. All the other secondary categories can be counted into that, but the first and foremost is race and ethnicity. That's what started this whole project, right? That's what opened up the university for all the other diversity: women diversity, gay diversity, senior diversity, all those other diversities that we get later. That the first act is the act to free ourselves and be ourselves as Black people, not only in the community, but also on campus. And that cannot be forgotten, right? And that's very important, because the 331 AB, they made them go back and add Jewish people to them and other people. But guess what? I told our president, our administration, look, y'all got every course in the curriculum just about, right? The only courses you don't have are the ones in ethnic studies. Did you just want it to be everywhere, right? What you got to raise some questions about that to yourself. That requires self-assessment. I know this sounds hard, but this is the way I talk, right? Because why shouldn't I speak truth? I don't just speak truth to power, I speak truth to the people. And this is more for the people than for the power, because without the people coming self-conscious agents of their own life and liberation, this can never happen. So we said, what is the defining features, right? When the first one is that we have race and ethnicity as our primary focus. For other people, it's a subject, right? It's a selected subject, or topic, right? It's most likely a topic, right? Us, it's all day, everywhere. Next, scholarship. The scholarship and teaching of ethnic studies, if it's done right, is grounded in the culture's concrete lived conditions and the living histories of peoples of color. It privileges their own intellectual achievements and groundings, intellectual tradition. It borrows from the best of what it means, in this case, to be African and human, right? And uses that as a source of reflective problematic. Third aspect of defining feature of ethnic studies is an explicit commitment to linking scholarship, teaching, and learning to social engagement. By social engagement, I mean service and struggle, to social change and to social justice. Next, it advocates and generates cooperative and collaborative initiatives of mutual benefit between campus and community. Nathan Hare said that the campus must go to the community, and community must be brought to the campus in a mutually beneficial way. The community must come to the campus and know that the knowledge that we're getting is for the benefit of the community and humanity, not simply knowledge for knowledge's sake, but knowledge for human sake, as Dr. Mary McLaren Bethune taught and Dr. Du Bois. Also, one of the things that makes us different is our stress on the agency of peoples of color and our commitment to methodological practices that interdisciplinary, comparative, intersectional, international, and transnational. and also our commitment to creating intellectual and institutional space for our students that ensure that their lives and the lives of the people are the subject of rigorous respect for original and generative scholarship, that their voices and systems of knowledge are given due recognition and respect, and that they are supported intellectually and practically in their struggle to push their lives forward and aid in creating a truly just, equitable, democratic, and multicultural society. The bill has two sections to it. The first, recognize ethnic studies as a result of student demand and struggle. So again, enshrining our history in law, right? That this was a result of student demand and struggle, as well as, of course, allies. You know, we always have to say that, even though we know students at the center, we always have to keep it in our people. Otherwise, they'll delink our students from our people, right? And they'll just take pleasure in talking about what they did rather than what they did for the people and how that links to a beautiful life for themselves. That's that interrelatedness that cannot be diminished or destroyed. And they also, the bill uses our definition that we have in the task for ethnic studies, an interdisciplinary and comparative study of race and ethnicity with specialized focus on the four historically defined racialized core groups: Native American, African American, Asian American, and Latino American. And then, of course, it reaffirms that the studies show that ethnic studies benefits people of color and white students academically and socially, and that ethnic studies courses play an important role in building an inclusive multicultural democracy. It also stipulates that it accepts the recommendation of our task force, the task force on the advancement of ethnic studies, to make ethnic studies a general education requirement in the CSU. In the second section, it says that it is the intent of the legislation that students of California State University acquire knowledge and skill that will help them comprehend the diversity and social justice history of the United States and society in which they live, and to enable them to contribute to that society as responsible and constructive citizens. It also provides that ethnic studies course begins this fall 20, that the CSU shall collaborate with us, the Ethnic Studies Council, as well as the Academic Senate. This is the first time this has ever been done. Usually only the Academic Senate makes these decisions. But here we are empowered by this legislation to develop, along with the Academic Senate and the Chancellor's Office, core competencies, which we've done to be achieved by students. And then also that the Council and the Academic Senate shall approve these core competencies. So the chancellor couldn't approve them by himself. He had to collaborate with us. And then also the students graduating in the academic year shall be required to take a minimum of 3 units. So what is the value we're fighting over this struggle? And I'm talking about Black studies in particular, but I'm going to use ethnic studies because that is the struggle we waged. And I respect the other ethnic studies, right? And their right to speak their own special culture truth and to make their own unique contribution to how this society and this educational system are reconceived and reconstructed. And everyone knows we need to reconceive, radically reconceive and reconstruct the educational system and the society for whom it's the brain. So there's ethical, intellectual, and social value of ethnic studies, right? And we insist, the first value is that it insists on an educational philosophy of process and practice that respects the human person in the concrete particular knowledge and experience. Yeah. Also, particular knowledge and experience and capacity to contribute to an enriching process of learning, teaching, and relating. It respects each people and culture as a unique, and this is a very important point of Qaeda philosophy. Each people and culture is a unique and equally valid and valuable way. Oh, am I out of time, Alicia? Who is this? Oh, no, actually. Respects each, assigned to a Dr. Suni Ali, would you signal me when I'm out of time? I have no concept of time on this, okay?
Yes.
respect each people and culture. This is an important Kawaida position, that each people and culture is a unique and equally valid and valuable way of being human in the world. And that each people, I repeat, has a responsibility, a right and a responsibility to make their own unique cultural contribution, to speak their, first of all, to speak their own special culture truth, and to make their own unique contribution to how this world, how this world is reconceived and reconstructed. And then I want to close out by saying one of the things that it does is teaches people to respect each culture's capacity as a critical source of reflective problematics. And by this, I mean that these cultures are sites of ideas, values, insights, practices, and problems solving in human life that are central to the educational process. Let me just close with two quotes. One is that, you know, we are a vanguard, right? We are moral and social vanguard. We go forward first, show and prepare the way. We embody and teach and demonstrate what is good, right, and possible in the community, society, and world. And we also cultivate the people to become, in this case, the students, but also our people to become self-conscious agents of their own life and liberation. And so we wage a righteous and relentless struggle to create visions, spaces, and practices of life and living that are rooted in mutual respect, grounded in freedom, anchored in justice, and based on an ethical sharing of good in and for the world. But we also know, and this is my quote from A. Philip Randolph, that the struggle is never quite finished. As Fanon said, as Cabral said, the struggle is a long and difficult one, and therefore we should mask no difficulties, tell no lies, and claim no easy victory. And A. Philip Randolph says, freedom is never granted, it is won. Justice is never given, it is extracted. And freedom and justice must be struggled for by the oppressed of all the lands and races, and the struggle must be continued. Why? Because freedom is never a final fact. Freedom is never a final fact. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Karenga.
Thank you all so much. At this time, we will begin our Q&A. The first question will come from this panel's chair, Dr. Suni Ali. This question is directed to Dr. Abdullah. Dr. Suni Ali says, I love the concept of opening our classrooms to our communities through social and other virtual platforms. Can you talk about how that decision came about, whether it is an ongoing practice, and what response you got, if any, from students and colleagues on campus?
Sure. So we had made, and thank you for the question, we had made the Freedom Campus demands and the idea of opening up the university. We had issued those in the summer of 2020. And so as we moved into fall, and our classes were online anyway, one of the practices I've always engaged in is thinking about places of autonomy. Where do I have power to do things? And then I realized, well, if the university isn't going to open up the classes, we're already online. What prevents me from opening up my class? And so it was kind of just a thought. And I said, okay, I'm just going to put it on Facebook, right? And so I did, and I didn't really think much about it until the first class, when there were like these thousands of people watching. And it was overwhelming. It was also really encouraging because, you know, they'll try to tell us that our people don't want to engage in ideas. They don't want to read. SO1 Books, which is a Black bookstore in Los Angeles, Black independent bookstore in Los Angeles. I order my books there for all the time, right? They sold out like in the first day of all the books. And it's not because of my enrolled students, it's because of the Facebook students. And so it was really, really encouraging. I had elders, my mom and her friends were all on my class, right? As well as there were entire high school classes that on the day of my class, which was, I think, Wednesdays at noon, they would actually, their class would be my class. And so it was, again, really encouraging. It was overwhelming. The university was very angry, but there wasn't a lot that they could do about it. I did talk with my union and did everything that I could to take protective measures. So I would actually take the first 10 minutes of class, ask questions of the university enrolled students, ask them what they wanted or needed, and then tell them that they could either use, because it was a Zoom to Facebook structure. I didn't use the university Zoom platform. I purchased my own Zoom so that they couldn't have access. But I asked the students if there were any considerations. Were there questions of domestic violence? Were there, even if they were just shy, were there questions of also immigration? Maybe they were concerned, so they could use pseudonyms. They didn't have to turn on their cameras. They could type and then say, can you read this? Those were all things that I offered to the students. And then thankfully, I had 2 folks who volunteered to be my Facebook TAs. So they would monitor the chat and then feed in questions from the Facebook comments into the Zoom comments so that I would be able to just monitor one chat rather than both chats. And it went really well. The university was upset, but all of the students, the university enrolled students, agreed to it. So if there were any objections, maybe I would have had a bigger issue, but people were excited. And actually the feedback that I got at the end of the semester, most of the university enrolled students, their written comments were how much they appreciated the openness. Some of them actually had their siblings and parents join the class along with them. So it was a really beautiful experience, and one that I plan to continue whenever I teach online.
Thank you so much for that question, Dr. Abdullah. The next question is from Dr. Umoja, and this can go to Dr. Davis. What types of challenges does activism, oh, I'm sorry, is that for Dr. Abdullah? Dr. Umoja, your question didn't specify who it was for. But the question is, what types of challenges does activism add to your career? What encouragement and advice would you have for colleagues to overcome fear, to engage in advocacy, and for our students, community, and discipline? Dr. Umoja, are you able to put in the chat who that question is for?
It was for the panel.
Okay, it's for the general panel, so anyone may answer that.
I'll take a stab at it first. There's one of the things I didn't say in the presentation, but one of the things I have realized through this COVID series and through my own writing is that to be a scholar and trying to decolonize how we think about our scholarship is having to part ways with this kind of Eurocentric thinking about this notion of objectivity. And I personally believe there's no such, I teach research methods, and I don't believe that there is such a thing as objectivity. So the idea that you have to suspend yourself from who you are, from your gender, from your ethnicity is problematic and makes it impossible to really be authentic. I think it becomes more important that we own that and we bring it to it, bring that with us to whatever we are working on, and it becomes a part of our advocacy. I cannot separate being a Black woman from being a scholar, an evaluator, or social worker. All of those selves come with me. And I feel I am better at my work when I embrace that reality, because then I can see, authentically see the other person, because their struggle is also a part of my struggle, something that I understand. And if you haven't been through that struggle, then it's harder to understand it, unpack it, and I think be of some assistance. So I think decolonizing that over the years has, I think, improved my scholarship and helped me to really be to understand how to practice cultural relevancy in research.
If no one else is going, I'll say something. Appreciate what you've said, and I agree with Dr. Davis. And I think that in addition to what she said, we should have a balanced approach to it and not think that if we have apprehension, that's wrong. We should have apprehension. That's built in biological to defend ourselves, right? And King said it. He said the difference between a coward and a brave person, not that one doesn't have fear and the other one does, it's that fear paralyzes the coward. So we can't let fear paralyze us. We have to act even when we have apprehension. And I prefer the word apprehension because I want you to see that it is normal to calculate risk and danger. And that's how we prepare for it. But we keep going. We've got to act. And in acting, we learn how to balance these things and how to overcome them because we succeed. And when we act and we struggle and we refuse to be defeated or dispirited or diverted, we win, right? The other thing that is important to me is I borrow from historical models. And one of the most important models for me is Harriet Tuffman. And so Harriet Tuffman has this statement, and I write it in my columns a lot when I write. And she said, look, if you want freedom, you've got to be serious about it. So if you're tired, you got to keep going. If you're afraid, you got to keep going. If you're hungry, you got to keep going. And if you want to taste freedom, you've got to keep going. You've got to sacrifice. She said you got to go free or die. And if you take that position, that's it. And that's what made me and my organization celebrate its 55th anniversary of what we call unbudgeting Blackness, doing struggle, work, service, and institution building. That's the history of our culture. We come from a culture of struggle, and we have to honor that. And it's important for us to not be silent or inactive in the face of evil, injustice, and oppression. As Fannie Lou Hamer, another great woman, model for us, is that she said we must fight to bring right and justice where there's wrong and injustice.
Very good. I have another question that I'd like to ask. This is Vice President Simpson, and I just want to thank you all for all that you've said today. It's been amazing. This has been a very informative panel. But Dr. Karenga and Dr. Abdullah, the question is, will you please comment on the passing of the 1460 Ethnic Studies Bill's impact on your respective departments' ability to grow and expand and even hire professors with degrees in Black studies?
Dr. Karenga, do you want to go first or you want me to go?
I would like for you to go first. Thank you.
Okay. So AB 1460 just passed and it's now being implemented. What we can anticipate, because it hasn't happened yet, one, we can anticipate being engaged in a fight at every turn, right? So as we talked about implementation, administration tried to do all it could do to implement AB 1460 in the most watered down way possible. It tried to push the ethnic studies requirement down to the community colleges, so it wouldn't mean a growth of ethnic studies in the CSU. But we fought back against it on campuses. We didn't win every battle, but we won many of them. What we're looking at on my campus is that we are going to be able to offer, the ethnic studies requirement will be exclusively offered by ethnic studies departments. And that was a bigger battle because of course, every department, when they see a new requirement, is saying now that's what they do, right? So communications, was like, we teach ethnic studies. History, Dr. Karenga gave an excellent example that actually exists on my campus. They said comparative Greek and Roman society should count as ethnic studies, right?
Yes.
We had an art department that said music videos should count as ethnic studies. And so we had a big fight to try to make sure that the ethnic studies requirement is only met by ethnic studies units. And as Dr. Karenga was sharing, disciplinary deference is given to everyone else. Nobody should say that a department other than math should teach math, right? Math teaches math, right?
Yes.
And so ethnic studies should teach ethnic studies. And we won that battle, or in the process of winning that battle on our campus. What we anticipate is the need to really double the size of our department. And we are the smallest group on campus, right? So Cal State LA is about 70% Latinx and about almost 20% Asian, and less than 3% Black. And still Pan-African studies will probably have to grow to at least 15 to 20 full-time faculty, in addition to the 40 lecturer faculty that we already have. That's what we're anticipating happening. It hasn't happened yet, but that's what we're anticipating. And so ethnic studies, the ethnic studies requirements, as we were engaged in the struggle, you know, and I feel very, very fortunate to have been able to labor alongside Dr. Karenga, and we just had a really beautiful team for the last 10 years working towards this. What we really envisioned this requirement as being is a way of kind of creating some stability for ethnic studies, that we don't have to fight every single semester for our existence, that with the requirement, it becomes very difficult for them to undo our departments, even when we're small in size in terms of student population share. It becomes very difficult for them to undo us. And so this is one of the things that I think that we should be continuing to work towards through NCBS. And of course, we're grateful that NCBS was one of the first organizations to write a letter in support of the bill. That was part of, I think, what made it so strong is that our discipline was behind the requirement as well.
And let me start with that. Asante Sana, Dr. Abdullah. That was an oversight of my part. I'm taking it for granted. But yes, when we talk about the other organization, certainly NCBS was strong in that. The letter was strong and it had an impact. And so I want to say, Asante, sometimes when you're part of it, it's just assumed, but it's not. And so we need to say that NCBS stepped up and continued that tradition. I praise Shirley for already being in NCBS and did that, but I should also say NCBS took a strong stand under our current president, Amilcar Shabazz. So one of the things that I think comes from this, of course, is that we will increase hires because we've already started new hires. And one of the problems we have with that is to make sure all of them are not lecturers, you know, because they're trying to get it on the cheap. So we're struggling for that. The other thing is that it does, as Dr. Abdullah said, increase our capacity for sustainment, because one of the things I said in my presentation is that it legalized our presence in a way that had not been done before. This is what it makes it so new and transformative, is that it does that. And also the disciplinary deference that we introduced and reaffirmed, this is important. And so there's an increased respect for our discipline due to its legal status now, right? It also helps strengthen our Council on Ethnic Studies, which has to be consulted. It will increase enrollment, right? We already have a lot of sections. That's why we had to hire some more lecturers. And also we got some tenure track initiatives we put forward, right? We got one of them, we got two pending. And then of course it increases our opportunity to improve quality education itself. It's a defective education that just sings songs for Europe. And imagine they did everything, right? Created everything, including air, and that we should be thankful just to breathe, that kind of conversation. So one can get surfeited on just talking about white people all the time. So it's not the world. The world is not 1/8 of itself. It's the 7/8 that were excluded plus the 1/8 that privileges itself. And so this is important. Also it reaffirms to students the worth of their study, the worth of their culture, the worth of their community. It reaffirms that because, as I said, people can tell you all they want. I respect you, but unless they use your course, your culture as a site for drawing reflective problematics, those are the essential issues and questions that form a discipline. Unless they somehow involve your culture in that, they don't really respect you, right? If every example you get, whether it's in science or math or sociology or art, it's always from Europe and they leave you out, even in music, right? There's an issue there, right? It also reaffirms a fundamental point that struggle is our way of life, right? That in the context of oppression, there is no reliable remedy except resistance, no strategy worthy of the name if it does not involve in privileged struggle. And there's no way forward except across the battlefield for a new world, a radically reconceived and reconstructed world.
Thank you all so much. And Dr. Karenga, someone wants to know, the points that you were discussing, are they coming from one of his books, from one of your books, or a manifesto? They said they need all of this information in one text.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's in two texts. The first text is Introduction to Black Studies. And then I transferred that as principal writer, much of that conversation I transferred to the president's, the chancellor's and CSU task force on the advancement of ethnic studies. That was the premier document that Dr. Weber used to formulate her bill and to make her arguments and to lobby in the fundamental arguments we ourselves made, those of us who struggled for this bill, right? That's it. So that's what it's coming from. Cognitive philosophy that you find in IBS, but also in this chancellor's task force on the advancement of ethnic studies. Mm-hmm.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much.
Our last question will come from our president, Dr. Shabazz.
Well, thank you all for this fantastic plenary session. I would like to note for everyone that this session has, of course, one of our longest serving board members in Dr. Milana Karenga, but also two of our new board members. Just this past Wednesday, the board of directors of the NCBS invited to come onto the board, approved the nominations of Dr. Molina Abdullah and Dr. Sarita Davis. So please welcome them, encourage them, support them as they come in to lead new work and to bring their energies and their hearts to the board. We do appreciate their stepping up to that role, and you'll certainly be hearing more from them through their work on the NCBS board. We still have a couple other vacancies to bring our board. By constitution, we're 25 members, so we're now up at 23, so we will be moving to fill some additional seats. We had, of course, Dr. Perry Hall that passed. We had Dr. Al Colon that stepped down some time ago, as well as some others that, and Dr. Shirley Weber, of course, who had long been serving, but is really engulfed in a lot of duties now, moving on to the new role in California. But all of that to say that this board is your instrument, you the members. It is your instrument for helping to guide and move the council to better serve you and to bring about this kind of radical imagining that was the theme of this session. I would just close by mentioning one other thing the board passed was our categorical endorsement of the council for the passage of House Resolution 40, as well as Senate 40 in the US Congress. These are the bills calling on the creation of a commission to study the harm that was done from the institution of slavery, as well, that was sanctioned and supported and imposed by the US government, as well as by its continuance even after the end of the Civil War, and the intergenerational trauma and impact of slavery, to study it and to make remedial recommendations to the Congress for how we can finally deal with this. We've had other kinds of commissions that have been appointed before by the Congress, different white folk commissions like the Kerner Commission talked about two nations and all these other kinds of things. But this commission, this reparations commission, is the one that we needed ever since 1865. We've needed ever since the emancipation and the Juneteenth freedom that came. We've been needing this commission to assess what was done. So I just close by highlighting that and seeing if our panel has any closing points they might like to make on that, or particularly on that, which we will be transmitting to Representative Sheila Jackson Lee and Senator Cory Booker, that our organization, that the council stands in support of their actions. And we do call on you, the membership, all our members in whatever state, wherever you are, to do all that you can to push for HR 40 and to contact your representatives, your congressional representatives, to pass this important bill. We have actions on the state level, such as in California, and even here in my little town of Amherst, Massachusetts. But the most important level in which we need reparations and reparative justice to get underway is at the national level. I yield, and again, thank you all for this fabulous plenary.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much. I do want to thank Dr. Okafor, Dr. Inwabara, Lisa, and Sean Williams for questions that they also asked our panel that were answered by the panel via text. I do want to remind you all that we do have a 3 o'clock session that we're going to be starting a little late with our Cato Fellows. Please, please, please come and continue to support our young scholars. As you always hear me say, they are the ones coming up who will replace us. So let's shower them with some love. Also at 5:30, we will have our induction into our honor society, which will be conducted by our very own Dr. Milana Karenga. So peace and blessings, as Dr. Bess always says, and we will see you all on the next webinar shortly.